Hi, I'm Dave Clark and I'm working with the Kingsbridge Dementia Friendly community to find out more about dementia, what businesses can do to be more dementia friendly, how we can all access information and support, and how we can ensure that the younger generation are also included in the picture. In this podcast, I'm talking with Juliette about her life when her mother was diagnosed with dementia, the resources and help that she sought, how she tackled some of the difficult questions with her own children, and how this all led to Juliette taking her own dementia sessions into schools.
5 years ago, I hadn't actually didn't know anything about dementia, and there was some problems with my mum, and we actually thought that perhaps she'd had a stroke or something like that, but she was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, which was came as a shock.
Yep.
and was kind of the start of my reading round the subject, trying to understand it, trying to work out what to expect, work out the best thing to do for my mum. It was a busy time in my life. I was just completing my PhD, my science degree, and I had 2 young children, so it was quite a busy time and a lot to take in.
You mentioned the children, so how old were they at the time?
So they would be 5 and 8 when my mum was diagnosed. They called her Nutty Nanny. Okay,
yeah.
Which we were very careful that didn't offend my mum, but
Sure.
She did just find it funny.
Yeah.
Because she didn't make that association at all. She didn't accept that she had dementia, but she knew that there was something going on, and she was happy with the term Nutty Nanny, and she would laugh things off. And the point when my children came up, when I was trying to help dress my mum, I felt guilty. I thought, You shouldn't have to do this. But my 5-year-old put my mum's bra on her head, and they all laughed about it, and they found it funny. And my mum laughed, the kids laughed, and they were just like, oh, it's fine. And that same occasion, I gave her the toothbrush, and she went to brush her hair with it. She'd had a shower, and she went and put the toothbrush through her hair.
So humour's a bit of a theme here, isn't it?
Laugh.
So that's not a bad thing.
No, it's not a bad thing.
The children are quite young. Were there any resources available? And if there were they any good?
I found the resources very difficult to find, and then they didn't seem appropriate. So there are some storybooks that talk about grandma, and they talk about, but it's very personal. And I found that the things that the book was describing weren't matching what we were experiencing in our lives. And since looking for kind of material and things to try and explain it to my children, I've realised how individual it is, and that's a key point that needs to be explained to children.
Do they understand in that way that children do? So they might not look like they understand, but actually they kind of get it.
They did. They kind of got it. And the issue with her going missing, it became clear that she needed to go. We need to look for care. We needed to look for a home, and the children were part of that. They came to some of the homes with us when we were looking, and we would talk about what we needed. Yep. So my mum went in, had a cup of tea, and didn't want to leave. Probably about 6 months after my mum died, I started to think about what information would have helped me. What would I have liked my children to already know? And I started to develop ideas about doing sessions. So I go into schools to do a session about an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. It's very child-led.
Yep.
I start by passing around a squishy model brain, and if you've got hold of the brain, you are allowed to say one thing about the brain, something you know about it, something scientific, what it looks like, what it feels like, anything to do with the brain. And then I write them up on the board. And then we go on and do some fun activities to do with the brain. So the children dress up as neurons. So obviously we talk about neurons first, and how many neurons and what they do, and the communication between neurons in the brain. And then they dress in these silly hats and little tutu skirts. So one's the head, one's the tail of a neuron. And they have these little games with the communication between neurons. And then we say, so what if you've got a brain disease? The brain does so many things. Now imagine if there's a brain disease and some of those neurons stop working. Well, it could affect any of the things that we've talked about on the board. There is an immediate kind of light on moment when they've got all those words in front of them that they've put up there, and then we will talk about a disease of the brain, and some of the children will say, oh, my grandma's got dementia, or I've heard of dementia, and then we kind of just talk a little bit about dementia out in the community. And so what are the symptoms, what might you recognise, and what problems might somebody have, or how would you know, and if you do spot somebody with dementia, what do you do? And it's all about reassurance and encouragement. The classic example is recognise that people with dementia have difficulty with perceived distance,
right?
And they might find that they're standing on one foot at some steps, trying to work out whether the step's going up or going down. So that's the kind of thing that they might recognise in the community.
Yep.
And in that case, well, I just kind of try and get them to say, well, what would you do? Try and encourage answers from them. But the answer would be, well, just offer encouragement, go and help, take their arm and guide them, show them that it's a step up, or show them that it's not a big hole. I think children are a lot more sensitive and smarter than we might give them credit for, and I think you need to talk to children quite frankly, and there's just little tiny bits of things that they can do to help.
You've been listening to Dementia Lives, and my thanks go to Juliette for speaking to us. It's clear that children need to be included in the discussions around dementia, and if you would like to find out more, please just search Kingsbridge Dementia Friendly Community. Dementia affects us all. This has been a How production. Thanks for listening. Please share and subscribe.